Tsogtbaatar did not know he was part of the study until it was already finished. A cattle herder from Khenti province in northeastern Mongolia, 51 years old at the time, living in the same river valley his grandfather had described as the land where the great ancestor once rode. He had given a saliva sample to a researcher from the National University of Mongolia who had driven out to his camp in the summer of 2003, explained the project in general terms, collected samples from 47 men in the surrounding area, and left. Tsogtbaatar assumed it was a health survey. He thought nothing more about it for 2 years. When the results came back, the researcher returned. She sat with him for a long time before she explained what the sample had shown. Tsogtbaatar's Y-chromosome, the genetic material that passes from father to son, generation to generation, carrying the male line of a family forward through centuries, matched a specific pattern, a lineage. One that the same research team had, by that point, identified in approximately 16 million men across a geographic range stretching from Manchuria to Uzbekistan. He was one of 16 million, and the lineage they all shared traced back by the genomic clock to a single man who had lived in northeastern Mongolia approximately 800 years ago. His reaction, as the researcher later described it, was not surprise, it was recognition. His family had always said they came from the old blood. They had just never had a number for it before. The number is what this story is about, and the number is the reason a finding published in the American Journal of Human Genetics in 2003 has never fully left the scientific conversation in the 2 decades since. 16 million was the 2003 estimate. By 2015, revised analysis incorporating larger sampling datasets from Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East had pushed the figure to approximately 17 million men carrying the lineage, making it the most successful paternal lineage ever identified in the human genetic record. No other single Y-chromosome signature in any population studied globally comes close to that number. The question the finding immediately generated, and has never entirely resolved, is where 17 million copies of one man's Y chromosome came from. The biological mechanism is straightforward. A man with many sons, whose sons had many sons, across enough generations and across a large enough geographic area can produce that kind of numerical legacy. The mathematics work. The question is which man? And the question after that is harder. What does it mean that we can identify in the bodies of 17 million people alive right now the biological residue of one person's reproductive success 800 years ago? Start with what the physical evidence actually shows, because the physical evidence is more specific than most coverage of this story acknowledges. The Y chromosome lineage identified by Dr. Tatiana Zerjal, a geneticist at the University of Oxford who spent several years mapping Y chromosome variation across Central Asia as part of the Oxford Genetic Atlas project and who led the 2003 study, is technically designated as haplogroup C2ST, formerly C3A-ST. A haplogroup is a genetic category, a cluster of Y chromosome variants that descend from a common ancestral form. Think of it as a surname written in biology. Everyone carrying it descends from the same original male ancestor, however many generations back. C2ST is ancient. It has been present in the Mongolian-Siberian region for at least 1,000 years prior to the historical Mongol period, and it appears at background frequencies in populations across northern Asia. What makes the specific sublineage identified by Zerjal's team extraordinary is not the haplogroup itself. It is the age of the common ancestor and the geographic distribution of his descendants. The molecular clock, a method for estimating when a lineage diverged from its ancestral form based on the accumulation of genetic mutations over time, places the common ancestor of all 17 million carriers at approximately 700 to 900 years ago. That window corresponds almost exactly to the lifespan of Genghis Khan, born around 1162 CE, died 1227 CE. The geographic distribution of the lineage follows the boundaries of the Mongol Empire at its 13th century maximum, but not uniformly. It appears at highest frequency precisely where the Mongol imperial family maintained direct administrative control and where members of the Borjigin ruling clan settled as governors and military commanders. It drops sharply in regions where the Mongols conquered but administered through local intermediaries. It is essentially absent in populations outside the empire's historical reach. That distribution is not what a randomly successful lineage looks like. It is what a lineage looks like when its carriers had systematic, institutionalized access to reproductive opportunities across a conquered territory, which is exactly what the historical record says the Mongol imperial family had. Here is the finding that broke the simple version of this story. and it arrived not from the Mongolian steppe but from a genetics lab in Leicester, England. By 2015, improved sequencing technology had allowed researchers to examine the C2ST lineage at higher resolution than Zerjal's original 2003 analysis permitted. A sublineage within C2ST, designated C2B1A3A1F3796, showed a coalescence date of approximately 800 years. Carriers of this specific sublineage were almost exclusively located within the historical boundaries of the Mongol Empire, but a second sublineage within the broader C2ST cluster carrying a different set of mutations showed a coalescence date of approximately 500 years, too recent to connect to Genghis Khan, but precisely matching the period of Mongol successor states and the rise of regional rulers claiming Borjigin descent. Two separate reproductive explosions within the same lineage, one in the 13th century, one in the 15th and 16th centuries. The second one was the ruling dynasties of the successor Khanates, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Yuan remnants in the east, the regional Mongol governors who continued claiming imperial descent and the privileges that came with it for 2 centuries after the empire itself fragmented. The number 17 million is not the legacy of one man's personal reproductive output. It is the cumulative legacy of an entire ruling class that maintained political power and the reproductive access that came with it, for roughly 300 years after the empire's founder was dead. This is where the story moves from genetics into something that living communities are still navigating. The Hazara people of Afghanistan and Pakistan, a population of approximately 5 to 7 million people, predominantly Shia Muslim, historically persecuted by surrounding Sunni populations partly on the basis of their claimed Mongol descent and the physical features associated with it, carry C2ST at frequencies significantly higher than surrounding populations. Their oral traditions have maintained for 700 years that they descend directly from Mongol soldiers and administrators who settled in the region during the 13th century campaigns. Neighboring groups dismissed this claim for centuries as self-aggrandizing mythology. The genetics confirmed it. Growing up hearing this history from the outside, I was always struck by how the same ancestry that connects these communities to one of the most powerful military forces in human history had been used for generations as a justification for their subjugation. The genetic confirmation did not change their political situation, but it settled permanently an argument that had been used against them. The Hazara case is not unique. Similar dynamics apply to Kazakh communities in Central Asia, to certain populations in southern Siberia, to communities in western China's Xinjiang region, and to groups in parts of Iran and Iraq, all of whom carry the lineage at elevated frequencies, all of whom sit within the historical territory of Mongol successor states, and many of whom have maintained oral traditions of Mongol or Borjigin descent that were dismissed as legend until the Y-chromosome data made them measurable. Dr. Spencer Wells, a population geneticist whose work building the National Geographic Genographic Project created one of the largest Y-chromosome databases in existence at the time of its compilation, noted in a 2007 analysis of Central Asian paternal lineages that the C2ST expansion represented the clearest documented example in the human genetic record of what he called social selection. A process where political power and social structure, rather than biological fitness in the traditional sense, drives the differential reproduction of specific genetic lineages. The Mongol imperial system did not make C2ST biologically advantageous. It made being Borjigin politically advantageous. The genetics followed the politics. That observation matters for how we understand the finding. 17 million people carry a lineage that traces to a single ancestral male 800 years ago. That is not evidence of something exceptional in that man's biology. It is evidence of something exceptional in the social structure his descendants built and maintained. A structure that allocated reproductive opportunity along lines of political lineage for 3 centuries across a territory spanning 2 continents. The cattle herder in Kentai province who gave a saliva sample to a researcher in 2003 carries that lineage in every cell of his body. So do 16,999 other men spread across a geographic range from Seoul to Istanbul, most of whom have no name for what they carry and no family tradition that points them toward the valley where Genghis Khan prayed at Burkhan Khaldun before every campaign. The lineage did not require their knowledge to persist. It did not require their consent. It moved through history on its own terms, carried forward in the bodies of people who were sometimes the willing inheritors of a claim to power and sometimes the product of circumstances they had no voice in, deposited in communities across 2 continents that are still sorting out 7 centuries later what it means to carry it. The 17 million number is not a monument to one man. It is a record of how power moves through populations, not in texts, not in monuments, not in political claims that can be disputed or rewritten, but in biology, which keeps its own account and presents it eventually to anyone with the tools to read it.